In this course, you'll take all that you've done so far and put it all together into a significant, meaningful project that you can use to demonstrate what you've learned and what you can do. You've learned a lot. The basic principles of user-centered design, how to take a design concept and test it with users to see if it works, how to take a concept and develop personas and scenarios to give that concept substance, and how then to sketch, wireframe, and prototype that concept. You've learned how to uncover user needs and organize them into a structure that will guide your design. And you've learned how to use large-scale methods like surveys, analytics, and remote testing to understand what users think and how they respond to particular products once they're released out into the wild. In the capstone, you'll choose a design problem and dive into it. You'll apply your needs-finding skills to gain a better understanding of who your users are and what they need. You'll apply your design and prototyping skills to come up with and make material your best ideas about what could address your users' needs. You'll use the evaluation methods you've learned, including user testing and heuristic evaluation, to assess and improve your design. And at the end, you will produce a prototype of a system that addresses your target users' problems and that you can use to showcase your new and improved UX research and design skills. This capstone has been designed for learners who have completed all of the other courses in the UX research and design specialization. If you haven't completed the other UX specialization courses, you should go back to the earlier courses and review them before undertaking the UX capstone. We've structured this capstone into 5 milestones. These milestones give you an opportunity to put your skills into practice with a real-world design challenge that you select. In each of the milestones, we'll give you specific instructions about the activities to perform and how to document the work that you do. All of the work you do for the milestones will contribute to the final report that you will submit when you complete the capstone. The milestone documents themselves, however, will not be submitted or graded. We have, however, provided you with a way to get feedback on your work from your fellow learners. The course includes a gallery tool that will allow you to post your work and ask for feedback, and will also allow you to see examples of your fellow learners' work as you provide feedback to them. To be successful in this course, do the work that's laid out in the milestones, share your work in the gallery, provide feedback to help other learners as they help you, and remember that all of the work in the milestones will be required for successfully completing your report at the end. Along the way, you'll also be quizzed on essential material that you would have learned in the earlier courses. The quizzes make up a small percentage of the grade, but they will be very helpful for helping you review and refresh your knowledge as you work on the milestones. Your final report will be graded. It will be graded by peers like you, and you'll be asked to grade other learners as well. An important ingredient for success in this capstone is to participate in giving and receiving feedback in the course gallery. There's no guarantee that you'll receive feedback on things that you post in the gallery. And this is why we encourage you to be generous with feedback for others. If everybody participates in giving feedback, then everybody will benefit by receiving feedback from the other learners. So think about other learners like you and share your thoughts on their work, and that will help make sure that you receive the benefit of others' feedback as well. To succeed in this capstone, we recommend that you allocate an effort of 10 hours a week, sometimes even more, in order to produce a quality prototype for your final report. Now, if you have less time than that available, do remember that the course is self-paced, and you can spend more time on the milestones that are trickier for you, and they can take longer to complete. If you ever have questions, if you can't remember how to do something or you're not sure what a milestone is asking for, we encourage you to go back and review the earlier course material that refers to that particular method or process. One last thing that you should keep in mind is that anything you produce in this class will be seen by others. It will either be seen in the gallery or it will definitely be seen as part of your final project report, which will be reviewed by your peers. So keep this in mind as you select your design challenge. We definitely recommend selecting a real-world project that means something to you, but only select a project that you are comfortable with sharing publicly. I'm excited and I hope that you are too. So let's get going. Hello. Let's get started on your Capstone project. So in this video, I'm just going to give you an overview of the project, what it is that you're going to be doing, and I'm going to talk to you about how to get started. So for this project, you're going to pick a problem that you're going to work on, and you're going to go through all of the steps of taking a problem, developing a concept for how you're going to solve that problem, and working through all of the steps of user experience research and design to come up with a design for an application that will solve that problem for those users that you've chosen. So the first step is going to be to identify the users and a need that they have that you're going to solve with your project. The next step is to go a little bit deeper and engage in needs finding. And here you're going to develop a better understanding of who it is that you're trying to help, what it is that you're trying to help them do, and how they do that now. What it is that they do to solve that particular problem or engage in that activity now. And you'll also really go deeply into it and understand why they do things the way that they do, because that's going to be important for you to come up with something that helps them do things in a way that's better than whatever they're doing now. You're going to then engage in ideation and sketching. You're going to think broadly and you're going to explore lots of different ideas for how you could possibly solve this problem and come up with the best idea that you can that you will then take forward to build into prototypes and test with users. The next step after ideation and sketching is actually to start prototyping, start building prototypes, starting with low fidelity prototypes and working through different fidelities of prototypes to get to a point where you can test these things with users and find out what works and what doesn't. And as a result, you'll be engaging in several rounds of user testing, where you'll take these different prototypes that you've built, actually try them out with users, have them try out the things that they need to do, and find out where the problems are so that you can fix them in your next round of prototyping. And somewhere in there, we'll also use other methods for evaluating, such as heuristic evaluation, to try to narrow down to the best possible user experience that you could deliver with the application that you'll be building. This project that you're going to undertake is not a small task. It's going to be a lot of work. The project that you choose is really up to you. We're going to give you some starting points. You don't even have to use our starting points. You are going to pick a project that means something to you, that you find interesting, and that's going to sustain your interest and your energy for the many weeks that it's going to take to get through all of the milestones for this project. We're offering a few design challenges to help you get started thinking about things that might be interesting to do. So you'll find on the course site the design challenges that we've spec'd out for you. One is productivity. So design an application that helps people be more productive, achieve their goals that are important to them, live their lives more efficiently. Another design challenge that we've laid out for you is a challenge around community technology. So can you develop an application that helps communities work better, that helps neighborhoods or cities or communities of people with shared interests be more cohesive and help each other out in ways that they currently can't do very well? And if neither one of those areas is particularly appealing to you, we encourage you to go ahead and create your own challenge and address that challenge. The first milestone after the portfolio review will be for you to produce a project brief. And a project brief is basically just a short document that describes the target users that you're going to be addressing, the needs that you believe those users to have. Now, you won't know everything about those needs yet, but you'll have some ideas. You should be able to identify a problem that these users have that you're going to solve. a very high-level description of the system capabilities. So what are the capabilities of the system that you would design to help those users address those needs? And we're going to ask you to say a little bit about why you think this is better than whatever's out there for those users to address those needs now. So how will you go about this? How will you go about picking your project and coming up with your project brief? Well, you're going to want to do a little bit of research. Again, this is something you're going to be spending a lot of time on, so you want to make sure it's something that is really going to hold together once you get farther into it. So once you've identified a potential user population and some needs, you're going to want to do some research to find out what else is already out there. What applications, websites, services are out there that already address or claim to address the need that you're trying to solve. What are the shortcomings of those offerings? Is there something that is lacking that needs to be done better, which is what you're going to offer through your project? And of course, you really need to convince yourself that there's a need that's worth addressing that's out there. So you don't want to go off doing a project for something that you find out later nobody really needs. It's not a problem. It's a problem that already has an easy solution. So you want to do some research to just make sure that you're starting out with something that's going to give you enough to work with. So how would you go about doing this research? Well, I would start by searching the web. I would look for products that are already out there that are in the space that you're interested in. Are there a lot of products? Are there a few products? What are the differences between these products? Are they aimed at different parts of the population or aimed at solving different parts of the problem that you might be interested in? You might look at product reviews. There might be products out there, but maybe they don't really work. Maybe people have a lot of negative things to say about them. Those might give you some ideas about directions that you might take with your solution. And you might look for background information in the problem space. If there's a particular area that you're interested in, you might try to find out more about those users and what their needs are. You might find articles or you might find user groups that are discussing the problem that you're trying to solve. And finally, you might take this opportunity to just talk to people about some of the ideas that you have. If you have friends and family that are potential target users for the thing that you might be looking at addressing, talk to them and see what their needs are and see how they do things now and what they know about and whether they see what you're doing as a potentially interesting solution to a problem that they have. And if your immediate friends and family aren't really quite the right people, you might think about reaching out to your social networks, people that you're connected to on Facebook or Instagram or other social media sites, and see what kinds of questions you might be able to get answered through those channels as well. One thing that's going to be very important up front is making sure that you pick a project that has the right scope. You don't want to pick a project that's too small. You don't want to pick a project that has an easy solution or a solution that isn't going to require user research, multiple rounds of prototyping, user testing, and things like that. So you don't want something that's trivial, but you also don't want something that's too big. You don't want this project to take the rest of your life. You want to have a project that within a few weeks or a few months, you believe that you could really attack it and you could cover a pretty substantial amount of the problem space that you want to address. Of course, you don't want to pick a project that's boring. A project, again, that has an easy or obvious solution or where there's a lot of examples of stuff out there that already solves the problem pretty well. It's going to be difficult to differentiate yours from other things that people have already done and that people are familiar with. I would also say, since this is going to be a starter project for many of you, this is going to be the first substantial UX project that you've taken on, I don't think you want to make it too exciting. I don't think you want to do something that nobody has ever seen before that you think is going to absolutely change the world. If you're pretty sure that you've got one of those, go for it. I absolutely encourage you to do it. But I would say you don't want to set your sights on that. You want to pick something that really solves a need and maybe isn't a huge leap from what people currently do. It's going to be a lot easier to communicate what it is that you've done, how you've thought about it, and it's going to be a lot easier to evaluate whether your solution actually presents an advance over the state of the art or what people currently do than if you try to do something that's completely unlike anything anybody's ever seen. Another very important consideration is ask yourself whether you have access to the target population. There's probably a lot of really, really interesting projects that you could do that are just not going to be feasible because you're not going to be able to talk to the potential users. Remember, the U in UX is for users, and user experience research and design is all about checking with actual users to find out what they need and whether the solutions that you come up with are going to work for them. So if you can't access the users, you're not going to be able to have a successful project. So you might have to think a little bit extra hard about picking an interesting problem that is a problem that is experienced by people that you have access to, people that you can call up on the phone or that you can meet with in person. I think I've convinced you at this point that this is going to be a pretty big project. And so one of the things that we're going to ask you to do for this first milestone is to plan ahead. We're going to have you look at all of the milestones, not just the first milestone, but all of the 6 milestones, so that you can envision yourself doing them. I want you to think about each of the activities that are specified in these milestones. These are all things that you've been exposed to in the previous MicroMasters courses, but you have to think about how are you going to do this? How are you going to access the users? How are you going to find the time to do it? And can you picture the kinds of things that you're going to need to do to take your project idea, your project brief, and develop it through all of these milestones? And we're going to ask you to make a plan, a real plan. We're going to ask you to write down dates and times and durations of each of these things to try to work through how you're going to actually accomplish these things. Now, we understand that plans don't always turn out the way that they are planned. So you may make a schedule, the schedule may slip, you may find that things happen that set you off course, and that's perfectly fine. But it's always better to start with a concrete plan where you've actually convinced yourself that you could do these things and you can fit them in and you can make them happen on a real timeline. And then if things change and you have to shift it around, that's okay. But you really need to start with something that's pretty solid. Okay, so that's it. You guys are ready to go. Look through the milestones, think about your project, and dive into it, and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. In this video, I just wanted to talk about the other parts of Milestone 1 that I didn't talk about previously. And those are creating a project brief and planning your needs finding study. The project brief is basically just going to be a document where you outline the essential elements of the project that you plan to pursue, including your target users, the user's needs that you plan to address or the problem that you plan to address, how you believe your users currently address those needs or address that problem, and what your design will do and how it will better address those needs. Now, you're not going to have answers to all of these questions yet. That's why you go about doing UX research, to find out better answers to these questions. But at the outset, you should have some idea of where you're headed and why it's a good idea. The other part of Milestone 1 that we need to talk about before you jump into it is how you're going to go about preparing for your needs assessment study. So you're not going to actually do the study as part of Milestone 1, but you're going to get ready for it. You're basically going to draw up your plans for what you're going to do for your needs assessment. And what you're trying to find out through your needs assessment study is, first, is the need real? And how important is it to your users? You need to check and make sure the problem that you're planning to solve is actually a problem that exists. And you're going to find that out by talking to the users that you think have this problem or have this need. You're going to try to find out how they address the need now. If it's a real need or a real problem, they're dealing with it somehow. What tools, what processes, what software, what apps, whatever are they following or using in order to address the need or the problem now? Because you're going to have to see if there's an opportunity for making it better somehow. You're going to try to widen the focus out a little bit and find out what other needs and activities are related. So you've got your need, your activities, your problem that you're focused on, but how does it fit in with the rest of their lives or the rest of the work that they're doing? And who else is involved? Are there other users or other stakeholders that might be important to consider when thinking about how your design might impact the context in which it's going to be used? And you're going to try to understand why. Why do they do things the way that they do? Is it because of the way that they were trained to do particular things? Is it because that's all that they know? They haven't been exposed to other ways of doing things? Is it because it works pretty well and there really isn't a need to try to find an improvement? And you're going to try to get more information to understand why it's important to address this need or problem. What are the effects of this need going unmet or not being met as well as it could be on your users, on their work, on their lives, on the things that are important to them? Another consideration in preparing for your needs assessment study is thinking about the different methods that you can use to get at users' needs. Obviously, interviews are asking people questions, and observations are watching people do the activities that you're trying to support. For interviews, what you need to do is prepare questions, think about what it is you want to ask, schedule an appointment with your potential users, typically plan to spend 30 to 60 minutes. You can do shorter if necessary, if it's difficult to find time with your target users that is as long as 30 to 60 minutes, but you want to try to shoot for as much time as possible within that general time frame so that you can get the best information you can. And for observations, you'll also need to schedule some time with your users. But in this case, what you want to do is watch them do what they do now and ask for explanations. So you might want to schedule time when they're planning to do the activities that you plan to support so you can just sort of look over their shoulders and try to understand how they go about doing what it is that they do, and then ask for explanations. Why did they do it that way? What other things are they taking into consideration? Try to get them to explain to you how they work with the tools that they work with and why they do it the way that they do. One approach that's commonly used in UX research is to include some of each, both interviews and observation. And the way that you would do that is schedule the interview to take place wherever the user currently performs the activity that you're interested in, whether that's their home, whether that's their car, whether that's their workplace. And ask questions, but as part of some of those questions, ask them to show you how they do the thing that you're interested in watching them do. And this way you can ask both kind of general questions to get at their higher level needs and context, but you can also get some concrete examples of how they handle the activity right now and why they do it the way they do. Once you've settled these questions of who you're going to talk to and how you're going to go about getting information from them, it's time to sit down and create your plan or write it down. You first want to start by writing about what your goals for the study are. What is it that you want to learn? You want to describe your target users and describe your recruiting strategy. How are you going to go about finding the users that you want to talk to for this needs assessment study? How do you know that they're the right people, and how are you going to get in touch with them? You're going to write down your interview guide, and these are the questions that you could ask in order to address the goals that you have for the study. And I say they're the questions you could ask because remember, it's important not to stick to the script strictly if the conversation starts to go off in different directions. You want to make sure you hit your goals. You want to make sure you answer the questions that you have that you really need to find out from your users, but you don't want to be stuck in kind of a robotic structure where you have to just step through a set of questions instead of allowing the conversation to flow more naturally. So for milestone 1, we're going to ask you to submit your project brief, your work plan, that's your schedule for when you're going to do all of the activities for the whole rest of the project, and your plan for the needs finding study. By the end of milestone 2, you should have a clear idea of who your users are and what their needs are. You should also have a clear design concept, but at this point, it shouldn't have that much detail. You're really just kind of outlining the basic functionality of the system that you're designing and what some of the basic interactions would be. I'm going to leave you with a few tips to think about while you're pursuing this milestone. First of all, remain open to what you hear from users. So when you formed your initial concept, you had some ideas about who your users are and what their needs are. Well, now you're going out and you're talking to actual users, and you may find some of your initial assumptions are incorrect or misguided. You need to stay very open to hear what your users are telling you so that you can steer your project in the right direction. At this point, you really want to resist premature commitment to ideas. Don't fall in love with your own ideas at this point. You're going to be sketching, you're going to be developing solutions that you think might work to the problems that you're identifying, but we're very, very early in the process. You're going to be learning a lot more as you go forward. One of the things you want to keep in mind when you're doing your sketching and ideation is to come up with lots of different ideas instead of just settling on the first idea that you have. Keep your mind open, try to explore broadly. You are going to have to come to some decisions towards the end of this milestone and going into the next milestone, but you want to try to stay open as long as you can. When creating personas and scenarios, ask yourself, are these personas detailed and rich enough to help me decide what would be a good direction for my design and what would not be a good direction for my design? If they're really generic and they sort of could apply to anything, they're not going to help guide your design. And the same with scenarios. With a scenario, you're trying to paint a picture of what a successful interaction would be like. Ask yourself if that scenario is useful enough to help you determine whether a particular design idea is going in the right direction or going in the wrong direction. And if it's not, try to put a little bit more meat on it and make it more specific so that it can help guide your design decisions going forward. Because you're going to be coming back to these personas and scenarios throughout your design process. So you want to make sure they're actually useful and not just sort of a placeholder that you wrote up to fulfill some assignment. By the end of milestone 2, you should have a clear idea of who your users are and what their needs are. You should also have a clear design concept, but at this point, it shouldn't have that much detail. You're really just kind of outlining the basic functionality of the system that you're designing and what some of the basic interactions would be. I'm going to leave you with a few tips to think about while you're pursuing this milestone. First of all, remain open to what you hear from users. So when you formed your initial concept, you had some ideas about who your users are and what their needs are. Well, now you're going out and you're talking to actual users, and you may find some of your initial assumptions are incorrect or misguided. You need to stay very open to hear what your users are telling you so that you can steer your project in the right direction. At this point, you really want to resist premature commitment to ideas. Don't fall in love with your own ideas at this point. You're going to be sketching, you're going to be developing solutions that you think might work to the problems that you're identifying, but we're very, very early in the process. You're going to be learning a lot more as you go forward. One of the things you want to keep in mind when you're doing your sketching and ideation is to come up with lots of different ideas instead of just settling on the first idea that you have. Keep your mind open, try to explore broadly. You are going to have to come to some decisions towards the end of this milestone and going into the next milestone, but you want to try to stay open as long as you can. When creating personas and scenarios, ask yourself, are these personas detailed and rich enough to help me decide what would be a good direction for my design and what would not be a good direction for my design? If they're really generic and they sort of could apply to anything, they're not going to help guide your design. And the same with scenarios. With a scenario, you're trying to paint a picture of what a successful interaction would be like. Ask yourself if that scenario is useful enough to help you determine whether a particular design idea is going in the right direction or going in the wrong direction. And if it's not, try to put a little bit more meat on it and make it more specific so that it can help guide your design decisions going forward. Because you're going to be coming back to these personas and scenarios throughout your design process. So you want to make sure they're actually useful and not just sort of a placeholder that you wrote up to fulfill some assignment. In milestone 3, you're going to take your project from the concept that you developed in the previous milestone through the initial prototype and to the preparation for your first user test. I will offer some tips. Most of this is also in the form of a refresher, stuff that you've heard before. First of all, when creating your wireframes and your lo-fi prototype, don't sweat the small stuff. Don't worry about things like the fonts, or this is the right font, the specific images that you might be using to illustrate aspects of the site. Don't worry about making the layout really pretty or any of that kind of stuff. You're really focusing on getting the information that needs to be displayed on each screen or each state of the interface, getting that right, getting the navigation between different states or pages or screens figured out, and all of that kind of stuff. You're not worrying about making it look really nice at this point. Another tip is you want to think about building the paper prototype for the user test. And what I mean by that is actually think about the tasks that you're going to test in your user test before building the paper prototype, so that you can make sure that the paper prototype covers everything that you need for the test, but not really anything more. You don't need to detail every aspect of the system at this point. You just need to detail exactly what you need in order to support your user test. So again, think about the tasks that you're going to test before diving into building your paper or your lo-fi prototype. In order to do that, you're going to want to review the guidelines for user test design, especially the guidelines for task design, before diving into prototyping. So you really want to think about the prototype and the user test design as happening in parallel, not one after the other. Another thing you're going to want to think about at this point is how are you going to capture your user test? So this is going to be a paper prototype test. So you're actually going to, whether you create your prototype by sketching on paper or whether you create it using some digital tool, you're going to print it out and you're going to actually perform the test using the paper prototyping method. So what's the best way to capture that? It's not something you can capture with screen capture software, for example. Well, here's one idea that doesn't cost very much money and can get the job done. This is actually a little tabletop tripod that has an extension that can hold a cell phone. So I assume most of you have a cell phone that can capture video. If you don't, you probably know somebody that has one that you could borrow. You just snap your phone in there, you push record, you can point it down at the table, and you can capture what your users are doing. Remember, you also want to have them think aloud as they're doing it so you can find out what their thought processes are and things like that. And I will mention that these devices, you can buy the tripod mount separately from the actual tripod. So if you already have a tripod, you don't need both. But this whole setup is going to cost less than about $30 US. So it's pretty cheap and pretty worthwhile investment if you see yourself doing this kind of thing in the future. In this capstone, we're going to go farther. You talked about high fidelity prototyping, but we didn't have a chance to do it in the earlier courses. We're not going to go all the way to a high fidelity prototype in this project either. Instead, we're going to go somewhere in between a low fidelity and a high fidelity prototype. A mid-fi prototype typically has the following characteristics. It's clickable, which means it's interactive, it runs on a computer or on a device, and a user can click through it and actually change from one screen to another. Typically, mid-fi prototypes have some color and some simple typography. They might have bold and unbolded text to highlight different parts of the screen, but they're not going to be fully developed in terms of graphic design at this point. And mid-fi prototypes are usually going to have realistic content, and they're going to have few or no placeholders. So rather than having placeholder text or boxes with X's through them to represent where an image is going to go, you're actually going to put in representative text and representative images to show what that particular interface is going to look like in that state. A mid-fi prototype is not, again, not going to have polished graphic design. It's not going to look that great. You're not going to spend your effort polishing and making it look really great at this point because you're still trying to work out the details of the interaction, what should go on what screen should lead to what other screens, and so forth. It's also not going to have fancy user interface tricks like animations and things like that. And it's not going to be dynamically generated. It's not going to be hooked up to a database. It's not going to be running fully developed software. It's going to mostly consist of static screens that you can click to transition between to show what the interface would look like if it was fully implemented, but you're not going to actually implement it. There are many, many tools out there that you can use for developing mid-fi and hi-fi prototypes. There are so many options that we're not going to really spend any time talking about them in any detail. Some of you may already have some tools that you've used, and we encourage you to share what you've learned on the discussion board so that others can learn from your experience. And if you are somebody who's just exploring this and you have questions, we encourage you to ask if anybody's had experience with particular tools. Here's a list of some of the most popular tools as of 2017 when I'm giving this lecture: Balsamiq, Axure, Proto.io, Envision, Framer, and Atomic. And the list goes on. And if you just search for best prototyping tools, you'll find multiple compiled lists that give really detailed reviews of the strengths and weaknesses of these different tools. Some considerations when choosing a prototyping tool to use. First is what fidelity is possible or encouraged with that tool. So what's possible is what does the tool allow you to do? Does it allow you to build a fully functioning, highly polished, highly designed website that has animation and all these kinds of tricks, or does it restrict you from doing so? The flip side of that is, what is that tool really designed for? A tool that encourages high fidelity prototyping might not be good for low and medium fidelity prototyping. So you want to pick the right tool for the job that you're trying to do at any particular time. Another important consideration is the ease of use, and this will be related to the fidelity that it encourages you to try to produce. So for example, does the tool give you standard widgets that you can drag and drop? Does it give you standard buttons and text boxes and image fields and things like that? Or is that something you have to draw manually by yourself? Does the tool require scripting to create the transitions between different screens? Or is that something that can be done with a point and click interface? And related to that, how configurable is the tool? A high degree of configurability is probably going to make it more complex, and it might be harder to produce the first instance of what you're trying to design. On the flip side, it might allow you to go farther towards the high fidelity prototype that you would eventually want to produce. And a final consideration is shareability. How easy is it to share the prototypes that you produce? Can they be automatically shared via the web so you can just send somebody else a link and say, hey, check out my prototype? Or if that isn't possible, do they allow you to export HTML that you can manually put on a website to share with somebody else? Or, as in the case of some tools, does it only produce a proprietary output that requires that you have the software installed on the device in order to show it to somebody else or to test it with a user? To just give an example of two of the most popular tools, Balsamiq on the left and Envision on the right, Balsamiq only supports a low fidelity look. There's only one font that you can choose, and a lot of the widgets have a kind of sketchy look, which is good for keeping you from focusing on the irrelevant things like fonts and so forth, but it can mean that other people looking at it will see something that's unfinished. Again, that may be appropriate depending on the stage of prototyping you're in. Balsamiq gives you a complete widget library, so you can just drag and drop different kinds of widgets to compose your prototype, and as a result, it's very, very simple to use. You can get something that is up and running in a very, very short period of time. It's relatively cheap to get the cloud plan for Balsamiq, which allows you to share your prototypes via the web. Another popular choice is InVision. In this case, InVision gives you no tools to actually produce the screens. You have to produce them using other software, other drawing software. For that, you could use PowerPoint or Google Slides or Adobe Illustrator, or Adobe Photoshop, or whatever tools you're familiar with. But InVision doesn't help you with that at all. So the screens are created elsewhere. Linking the screens together and making the transition between the screens is easy. However, producing the screens, well, the difficulty is kind of up to you, and it depends on how high fidelity the screens are that you're trying to produce and how familiar you are with the graphics tools you would use to produce them. The online version of InVision is free for up to 2 projects at a time. And with InVision, it's very easy to create interactive prototypes, share the link with other people, and have them try it out and give you feedback. Both of these are tools that are worth a look. If you don't have any other information about tools or experience with other tools, I'd recommend checking these out, in addition to checking out other tools that you might come across. Regardless of which tool you choose, there's going to be a bit of a learning curve getting familiar with it. The good news is you will find many, many tutorials online. So some research is required to find the tutorials for the tool that you're interested in, figure out whether the tool is right for you, but we're not going to actually go into that in this capstone. And in case you're feeling that we're sort of selling you short by not training you on a particular prototyping tool, I'll just let you know that we don't teach those prototyping tools on campus either. And the reason for that is because they change so rapidly and there are so many personal preferences involved that we find that students would prefer to go out and self-educate, teach themselves, train themselves on the tools that they want to use rather than spending class time learning how to do it. And so we encourage you to go out and explore on your own as well. But of course, feel free to ask for help on the discussion forums, ask for advice, and try to find the tool that's right for you. When creating your mid-fi prototype, it's worth thinking about what you're going to be doing next. And the next step is the heuristic evaluation. As you'll hopefully recall, the heuristic evaluation has you look at things like the specific language that is used in the interface, the navigation between different parts of the interface, so the key task flows, but it also asks you to look at how the system handles errors. And so in your mid-fi prototype, you're going to want to nail down things like the specific language, the key task flows that you're going to be examining, but also you're going to want to include some error handling. So identify places where users are likely to make errors or where errors could occur, and make sure your design includes support for preventing those errors and notifying users when errors have occurred. So you might want to think about those heuristics as you're designing the interface because you're going to be evaluating the interface based on those heuristics in the next step. First, with the heuristic evaluation, do your best to be objective. This design is your baby. You've put a lot of work into it. You know how it's supposed to work, and now you have to take a step back and try to look at it objectively. One technique for doing this is try to see the prototype through the eyes of your personas. Try to imagine how they would look at it. So when you're thinking about questions like, is this language appropriate or a familiar language to the user, think about what your personas would see when they look at the language in your interface or when they try to conduct the task as you've designed it. After the heuristic evaluation, before you jump into building your final prototype, remember to take time to brainstorm and sketch different solutions to the problems that you find in the heuristic evaluation. You still want to use those techniques to try to make sure that you're exploring the best possible solution to problems that you find. Hello and welcome to Milestone 5. When you move to working on your final prototype, this is not going to be a rebuild from scratch. You're going to stick with the same prototyping tool that you worked with before, and you're going to stick with the same prototype that you already worked on for your medium fidelity prototype, and you're basically going to be editing and improving that prototype. So you don't need to start from scratch. For your final prototype, you're again going to widen the focus of the functionality that you're prototyping. You're going to add 2 or 3 more tasks. These could either be key tasks that users need to accomplish in order to achieve their goals with the interface, or if you feel like you've covered those key tasks, these could be more maintenance or bookkeeping type tasks, things like creating an account, logging into the account, recovering a lost password, configuring settings, and things like that. You're going to be trying to create a complete interface at this point. So you need to cover all of those different types of tasks for this interface. And you want to polish this up, make it look a little bit nicer, add a bit more color, bit more layout, a bit more graphical pizzazz if that's something that you are comfortable with. You don't necessarily need to, but you want to try to make this as complete an expression of your ideas about this design as you possibly can. And it should cover all the functionality that a user would need in order to be successful with the application. When thinking about the user test that you'll be planning, this should be very familiar. It probably will be very similar to the user test that you performed a couple of milestones ago. The only difference being that you need to plan to recruit new users. You should not reuse participants from your previous user test. You could reuse participants from your needs finding study if they didn't participate in the first user test. The key is the participants in your user test need to be seeing the system for the first time. That way they haven't already figured out the logic of the system. They're coming to it with fresh eyes, and that's really what you want to see in this kind of a user test. And one other note about the user test, you have the option in this instance to investigate using remote technologies like usertesting.com to conduct at least some of your user testing session. That's a great skill to have. I would recommend taking advantage of it if you are interested in pursuing that. But you need to check it out and make sure it's going to work with your setup, it's going to work with the prototyping tool that you've chosen, and so forth. And if you plan to conduct at least some of your user test sessions in person, you're also going to need to investigate recording approaches that you can use for in-person testing, screen capture software, video recording software, all of these kinds of things. And we will be providing some resources for those on the discussion forums and on the site. Okay, you've put a lot of work into this project so far, and we're getting to the point where you can see the end. It's not far away. Keep working, keep going forward, make those prototypes as complete as you can, and I'll see you again for milestone 6. Welcome to milestone 6, the final milestone in the Capstone design project. We're almost there. We just have a little bit to tie up loose ends and package everything that you've done into a nice deliverable that can represent all of the great work that you've done on this project so far. The only thing that's new about this is going to be writing the report. We've given extensive details on the site for how to go about writing the report, things to think about when writing the report. But one tip that I will give you here is don't think about writing this report for me or for the course staff. Think about writing this report for a more general audience. You could imagine writing this report for somebody that you're trying to convince to build the application that you've designed. And of course, you might think about writing this report for future potential employers or future people that you might work with to showcase the kinds of things that you can do. So don't just write this to pass the milestone. Think about writing this to communicate what it is that you've done, why you've come to the decisions that you've come to as far as the way that the prototype is put together, what you've learned about your users, the tasks they're trying to accomplish, and how you think your application would help them do what they need to do better than how they currently do it. It's been a long road. You're at the end of it now, and I can't wait to see what you guys have produced. Congratulations, you made it. Through 6 milestones, you've taken a concept and developed it into a polished prototype that you've tested twice and evaluated once, and you hopefully learned a lot about how to conduct UX research and design projects, and you've learned a lot about your particular users and the application that you were developing. So what is it that we've just done in this Capstone course? Well, as I think you've realized, we've conducted iterative design, and we've gone through multiple turns of the iterative design cycle. That is, we've conducted multiple assessments, multiple rounds of design, and built multiple prototypes. We use iteration to continually assess the work that we're doing and assess the user's needs, design solutions to the problems that we find, and build prototypes that we can use to assess how well the prototype serves the needs of our users. You might ask, how well does the experience that you've just had translate to work that you might do as a UX professional? Well, this project that you've just completed is a kind of a textbook project. It uses most, if not all, of the best known, most fundamental UX methods. It involves multiple iterative cycles, and it may be that in the real world, you would come across projects that aren't quite as thorough, that don't go through as many methods, that don't go through as many prototypes. Also, in real world UX, your particular role might only be part of this process. You might be involved in the research, the assessments, but not so much in the design or prototype building, or vice versa. It might be that a particular project is really focused on doing a deep assessment of user needs, and a different group or a different designer is going to take over the prototyping and evaluation. So these methods and these design cycles might be put together in lots of different ways. You won't always see them laid out in this kind of a sequence like we did in this project. Another difference you might find is that in contrast to the process that we followed in this capstone, where we laid out in advance what prototypes we were going to build when, what methods we were going to use when, in real-world UX research, the methods and the choice of activities is often driven by what the most pressing question is at any particular time. Because of the structure of this course, we didn't allow you as much flexibility as you might have in the real world to decide when you need to do an interview with users, or when it's time to do a user test, or when it's time to go from a medium fidelity to a high fidelity prototype. You might actually stay in medium fidelity prototypes for multiple cycles and conduct multiple user tests while trying to get the design right. Or you might skip over it because time is too short and you need to be able to produce something that's ready to ship in a relatively short time period. So we followed a very thorough process and we scripted the process in advance, but that's not necessarily the way it's always going to work in the real world. Another difference that you might find is that not all projects do big design up front. In this project, we did multiple rounds of iterative design and produced a prototype that would then have to be turned over to software developers who would develop it into a real product. Many organizations use agile methods where the programming and the development is happening alongside the design activities. So you might be producing wireframes and prototypes and conducting interviews and conducting user tests in an on-demand fashion to synchronize with the developers who are producing the actual products at the time that you're doing the development. Obviously, that was not something that we were able to model in this capstone experience, but the methods that you used and the general type of thinking of going from lower to higher fidelity would still apply in those types of projects. So now that you've completed this capstone, what should you do next? Well, the first thing you should do next is you should start building your portfolio. Start with the products that you created for your capstone project, especially your final report, but also go back to other courses that you took and take the pieces that you're particularly proud of and make sure you have them organized in a way that you could share with somebody who you want to show your skills off to. You may even consider building a website that showcases your work so that you can share that more easily with people. And many UX design and research professionals have portfolio websites like that. You can look around for examples to get some inspiration for how to build yours. Another thing that you can think about doing next is find ways to get more practice with the methods that you've been using and that you've developed. You could obviously pursue your own projects like we've done in this capstone, come up with an idea and try to work through all of the aspects of it and produce a prototype. But you probably would even have more satisfaction and get better real world experience if you can find somebody who needs a design project done for something that they're interested in. One way you can do that is you can think about organizations in your community who might not have the resources to build a website or to build a mobile app or something that they might need, and you can volunteer your services to work with them to go through the UX research and design cycle to produce a design that might help them achieve their goals. Another step that you ought to consider is find out if there are professional groups and professional meetings for UX professionals in your area. We will be putting a resources page together and posting it on the course website to give you some pointers to the most well-known and active professional associations like IXDA, which is the Interaction Design Association, and UXPA, which is the User Experience Professionals Association. These are organizations that have chapters in many cities around the world. Many of them have regular meetings where you can go and network with other UX professionals, hear talks about emerging methods or projects that people have done, and try to find ways to get involved and build new skills. And the other answer to the question of what to do next is keep developing the skills that you've started to develop through the capstone. There are many books, blogs, magazines, and other resources that you can use to keep up on developments in the UX field and go deeper into the methods and practices that we've learned through this MicroMasters. And as I mentioned before, it's important to actually practice these skills. Try to conduct user interviews, conduct user tests, design, sketch, prototype, to get better and to get more comfortable with these skills and these tools and start to learn the ins and outs of when to do what. You may have a sense of whether UX research or UX design is where your passion lays, or whether your passion lays in a mixture of the two. If you find that UX research is where your interests lie, I would encourage you to seek out more opportunities to learn more about qualitative and quantitative research methods. Take other online courses, take courses at your local community college or university, and learn more about the methods that people use to conduct qualitative research in the social sciences. You can learn a lot more about best practices for conducting interviews and conducting observational studies, for example. You could also go in a quantitative direction and sharpen your skills in statistical analysis. That would help you to be able to do large-scale online experiments more effectively, or conduct surveys or web analytic studies in a more effective way. And if you find that your passion lies in UX design, I would encourage you to study graphic design. Whether taking courses online or in person, develop skills with using graphic design tools, and develop your sensibilities as a designer so that you can make very compelling visual designs to express the ideas that you have about how systems should work and how they should look. It's also a really valuable skill for a designer to have some facility with front-end programming. These would be technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript so that you can actually make interactive applications. You may not be building the entire application, but you can actually make a realistic website or mobile app that can be fully interactive and be integrated with a backend that might be developed by somebody else. Front-end programming is not strictly essential for being a successful UX designer, but it's a skill that can really enhance the tools that you have at your disposal. It's been a long journey, and I really appreciate you coming on this journey with me. I've enjoyed teaching these courses, and I've really enjoyed seeing the great work that you guys have produced throughout these courses. I wish you the best of luck, and please keep in touch. In this course, you'll take all that you've done so far and put it all together into a significant, meaningful project that you can use to demonstrate what you've learned and what you can do. You've learned a lot. The basic principles of user-centered design, how to take a design concept and test it with users to see if it works, how to take a concept and develop personas and scenarios to give that concept substance, and how then to sketch, wireframe, and prototype that concept. You've learned how to uncover user needs and organize them into a structure that will guide your design. And you've learned how to use large-scale methods like surveys, analytics, and remote testing to understand what users think and how they respond to particular products once they're released out into the wild. In the capstone, you'll choose a design problem and dive into it. You'll apply your needs-finding skills to gain a better understanding of who your users are and what they need. You'll apply your design and prototyping skills to come up with and make material your best ideas about what could address your users' needs. You'll use the evaluation methods you've learned, including user testing and heuristic evaluation, to assess and improve your design. And at the end, you will produce a prototype of a system that addresses your target users' problems and that you can use to showcase your new and improved UX research and design skills. This capstone has been designed for learners who have completed all of the other courses in the UX research and design specialization. If you haven't completed the other UX specialization courses, you should go back to the earlier courses and review them before undertaking the UX capstone. We've structured this capstone into 5 milestones. These milestones give you an opportunity to put your skills into practice with a real-world design challenge that you select. In each of the milestones, we'll give you specific instructions about the activities to perform and how to document the work that you do. All of the work you do for the milestones will contribute to the final report that you will submit when you complete the capstone. The milestone documents themselves, however, will not be submitted or graded. We have, however, provided you with a way to get feedback on your work from your fellow learners. The course includes a gallery tool that will allow you to post your work and ask for feedback, and will also allow you to see examples of your fellow learners' work as you provide feedback to them. To be successful in this course, do the work that's laid out in the milestones, share your work in the gallery, provide feedback to help other learners as they help you. And remember that all of the work in the milestones will be required for successfully completing your report at the end. Along the way, you'll also be quizzed on essential material that you would have learned in the earlier courses. The quizzes make up a small percentage of the grade, but they will be very helpful for helping you review and refresh your knowledge as you work on the milestones. Your final report will be graded. It will be graded by peers like you, and you'll be asked to grade other learners as well. An important ingredient for success in this capstone is to participate in giving and receiving feedback in the course gallery. There's no guarantee that you'll receive feedback on things that you post in the gallery. And this is why we encourage you to be generous with feedback for others. If everybody participates in giving feedback, then everybody will benefit by receiving feedback from the other learners. So think about other learners like you and share your thoughts on their work, and that will help make sure that you receive the benefit of others' feedback as well. To succeed in this capstone, we recommend that you allocate an effort of 10 hours a week, sometimes even more, in order to produce a quality prototype for your final report. Now, if you have less time than that available, do remember that the course is self-paced, and you can spend more time on the milestones that are trickier for you, and they can take longer to complete. If you ever have questions, if you can't remember how to do something or you're not sure what a milestone is asking for, we encourage you to go back and review the earlier course material that refers to that particular method or process. One last thing that you should keep in mind is that anything you produce in this class will be seen by others. It will either be seen in the gallery or it will definitely be seen as part of your final project report, which will be reviewed by your peers. So keep this in mind as you select your design challenge. We definitely recommend selecting a real-world project that means something to you, but only select a project that you are comfortable with sharing publicly. I'm excited and I hope that you are too. So let's get going.